All right, everybody, we're going to get started 1 minute early. Welcome to the Shad and River Herring Management Board. My name is Lynn Fagley from the state of Maryland. I am happy to serve as your chair today. To my right, I have James Boyle, our plan coordinator, Wes Eakin, TC chair, and Dr. Katie Drew. So the first thing that I want to do is ask for an approval of the agenda. I will say that there's one small change that did appear in supplemental materials. We will not be having the advisory panel report today, so that goes off the agenda. Is there anybody who is opposed to the agenda as it stands? Okay, seeing none, we'll move forward by consent, and then we're going to look at approval of proceedings from August 2024. Are there any changes or additions? Roy Miller.
Madam Chair, I just happened to notice when looking through the minutes, there was a reference on their page 8 peer review panel report. It says Dr. Conway. That's Dr. Conroy. So I'd like to make that correction. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And I'm assuming it looks like staff has that noted. Are there any other edits or changes to the agenda? All right, any opposition to the agenda as it stands? Okay, seeing none, we will move forward. The next thing on our agenda is public comment. We received some comment in writing, which we appreciate. Is there anybody from the public online or in the room? Okay, no public comment. Okay, so this is our action item. We've got several Shad and River Herring Sustainable Fishery Management plans to consider today. We'll be looking for motions. We're going to go through a little bit step by step here. We're going to consider New Hampshire, then we're going to consider Maine, and then we're going to do Massachusetts and Connecticut together. So with that, I'll kick it over to Wes Eakin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. We'll just jump right into it. If we can get the next slide, please. So today I have 4 SFMP updates for board consideration, 2 for river herring from New Hampshire and Maine, and 2 for American shad in Massachusetts and Connecticut. And then we also have a proposal to reopen New Hampshire's river herring fishery following a closure in 2021. Next slide, please. So just a bit of background about SFMPs and what's required of them, as well as the sustainability definition and the FMP. The amendments 2 and 3 of the Shad and River Herring FMP require states wishing to have a fishery submit a SFMP that will demonstrate their stock could support commercial and/or recreational fishery that will not diminish future stock reproduction and recruitment. These plans are updated and reviewed every 5 years. Next slide, please. We'll start with New Hampshire's SFMP update. New Hampshire manages their river herring fishery on a statewide basis in lieu of river-specific or species-specific. Data from 6 rivers within the Great Bay Estuary are combined to develop the Great Bay Indicator stock, and that is used to develop their sustainability metrics. Harvest in New Hampshire is primarily for personal use as bait in the striped bass fishery, as well as bait in the lobster fishery. Between 2010 and 2020, statewide landings ranged from just over 5,000 fish to just under 22,000 fish, and 95 to 100% of that harvest occurs in the estuary. Next slide, please. So new additions to the SFMP include updated mortality rates, standard error calculations for their visual time count estimates, updated information from the 2024 river herring benchmark stock assessment, and an updated escapement target. Next slide, please. New Hampshire has developed 2 sustainability targets, one for fisheries dependent, which is an exploitation rate of less than 20% on the Great Bay Indicator stock, and one for fisheries independent, which is an escapement target of 94,589 fish. New Hampshire will review both of these sustainability targets on an annual basis to determine if there's a management action necessary. And those management actions are, if the fisheries dependent target is not met, they'll add additional days or areas of prohibited harvest for river herring, implement or lower daily harvest limits, for permitted state permitted harvesters and or implement a daily catch limit for recreational anglers. If the fishery's independent target is not met, the fishery will close in all state waters. This plan was recommended for approval by the TC. Next slide, please. So moving into New Hampshire's proposal to reopen the river herring fishery, as I mentioned, the fishery was closed in 2021 due to low spawning run counts in 2019 and 2020, leading to a failure to meet their fishery's independent target. If approved today, New Hampshire is proposing to reopen the fishery for 2025. New passage estimates in the Exeter River have been above the fishery's independent target, escapement target level for the past 4 years. New Hampshire has also given some reason for the low run counts in 2019 and 2020. They attribute that to low water temperatures and decreased flows during the early part of the spawning season. In the Cocheco River, they had equipment failure and fishway modifications in 2016 that led to a loss of ladder efficiency and decreased river herring passage. And in the Exeter River, the Great Dam and Fishway was removed in 2016. The next dam up, the Pickpocket Fishway, or the Pickpocket Dam and Fishway, which is a little over 13 kilometers upstream, did not have good returns despite observing thousands of fish passing the former dam location. Next slide, please. So New Hampshire took some corrective actions in the Cocheco River. They converted the fishway back to how it had operated prior to 2016. It offered more consistent water flows. In the Exeter, it was determined that the river herring reaching the Pickpocket Fishway was not providing an accurate population estimate of those fish migrating past the former dam location. Therefore, they developed a new counting methodology using visual time counts at the former Great Dam location beginning in 2021. Next slide, please. These two figures here are the current sustainability targets. The figure on the left is the fishery's independent target that shows that exploitation has remained at or below 20%. The figure on the right is their fishery's independent target that shows that they have had escapement above their escapement target for the past 4 years. Next slide, please. So in summary, New Hampshire has made the following as their case for reopening their fishery. They've exceeded their fishery's independent target for the past 4 consecutive years. The majority of the harvest comes from the Exeter River, which is already very restrictive, where there's only 2 days of fishing allowed per week with 1 total of fish per day. The Cocheco River will remain closed while improvements to the fishway and fish passage continue. Harvest on the Cocheco is minimal, and the river's closure likely won't increase fishing pressure on other systems in New Hampshire. The remaining rivers of the Great Bay indicator stock can support harvest opportunities while continuing to meet New Hampshire's sustainability targets. Next slide, please. So last month, the TC reviewed New Hampshire's request to reopen, and during that review, the TC referenced the TC guidance document that recommends a 5-year consecutive years above the targets occur before reopening. The TC was hesitant to go against the previously established guidance, but they also acknowledged that it is unclear whether that decrease in spawning run counts in 2019 and 2020 were true reflection of abundance or due to the methodology. The TC was unable to reach a consensus of whether to recommend for or against New Hampshire reopening their fishery a year earlier than recommended. Next slide, please. And with that, I'd be glad to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Wes. Are there any questions from the board about this presentation? Okay, no questions. So what I'd like to do, because we're going to need an action on both approving the plan and the proposal to reopen the fishery. So I wanted to, Cherie Patterson, I wanted to turn to you just to see if you had any additional thoughts or comments for the board before we make that decision.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is a recommendation from the TC to keep a fishery closed for 5 years. It's not something that is definitely a mandate and such. We have very good reasons for wanting to open it a year ahead of that, 4-year closure as opposed to a 5-year closure. When we did the dam removal in downtown Exeter, fish were obviously going up through. They just dropped out and spawned before they hit the next fishway, which was, as indicated, 13 kilometers above where the former dam was in downtown Exeter. So we were anticipating to have fish counts occur at that fish slather, thinking they were going to go right up through. They did not. They dropped out and they spawned in the lower section. We did notice a difference in species. We noticed that there was a lot more bluebacks, which want the riverine habitat as opposed to the impoundment habitat that were noted in our sampling, as well as we still have a very good range of ages. So we did not note any discrepancy or any missing ages at all since we have been sampling in that river, since the dam was removed. As for the Cocheco River, we are still very cautious there. We did pull out internal modifications that we had put in to increase the efficiency of the fish ladder. So obviously that worked this year. We had a count of 77,000 fish that went through the Cocheco fish ladder, but this is the first year that we had any respectable, what I would call respectable returns to the Cocheco. So we are going to keep the Cocheco closed until we get a few more years of decent returns back to that system. We had very little harvest activity in the past in the Cocheco River. It's not going to produce inordinate pressure in any other river system that we would want to open up. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cherie, for that. So any further questions? Anybody have any questions on this issue before we go to a motion? Okay, seeing none, does anybody have a motion for the board? Cherie Patterson.
Thank you. I'll wait till it gets up. Oh, there we go. I move to approve the updated river herring sustainable fishery management plan and proposal to reopen the fishery from New Hampshire as presented today.
We have a motion on the board from Cherie Patterson and a second from Dan McKiernan. Is there any discussion on the motion? Pat Kelleher.
I should have asked this before the motion, Tree, but so is the plan to have some limited harvest or a regular harvest, or are you still going to wait a year, approving and waiting a year before the harvest?
No, we're hoping to open up harvest under the same rules that we had prior, with the exception of closing the Cocheco. So we have other rivers closed. We have the Oyster closed, we have the Taylor closed, and the Exeter River, we have just 2 days of harvest allowed. 2 days. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? So just to be clear, the proposal, it's a year early to open with the reasons given. So any other discussion? Allison Colden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, very great information presented and lots of supporting rationale for the action on reopening in New Hampshire. Obviously, as Cherie pointed out, the technical guidance is not a requirement. It's not a mandate. My only, slight hesitation here is that it's, as much as technical guidance is for the states to understand what the technical committees are comfortable with. I also think it gives states and stakeholders important expectations on the types of data that are required to bring the technical committee to a place of comfort in evaluating these types of decisions. So, I'm not necessarily, adamantly opposed, but I do have a little bit of hesitation moving forward against the technical guidance that currently exists and kind of what we all understand to be the needs for the technical committee to help us make these types of decisions.
All right, thank you, Allison. Steve Train.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can support this motion, but I have a question more about the procedure. Maybe I need some more clarity. Sheree told us what they plan to do, but the motion says that we're opening up the fishery. Are we going to be able to do motions like this from now on for every state and not have specifics in it? Or do we have a copy of as the plan presented somehow included? I mean, I want the fishermen to fish, but the motion seems broader than what we're actually voting on.
Yes, Tony.
I think I'm correct on this, and James, let me know if I'm wrong, but the SFMP lays out what rivers they plan on opening and what rivers they plan on keeping closed. So that is the updated river herring SFMP that is listed in that motion there.
Right, so the proposal is very detailed. Rick Jacobson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a little confused as the rationale for reopening a year early. As I heard it, there were 4 different potential drivers of the low counts that were observed that led to the closure in the first place. One of those were technical difficulties with the ability to count at the established counting point, the fishway. Another was that a dam was removed and that some number of the individuals that would have otherwise been counted further downstream had dropped out because they are spawning in the intervening place. If either of those were the driver, well, those are just technical anomalies that led to a aberrant low count. And I would be inclined to say after 4 years of consistently high counts to approve the message, the proposal. But on the flip side, there was also something in the original presentation that suggested the low count might have been a product of environmental factors, water temperature and low water. If in fact they were driven in that initial closure by environmental factors, that seems a very different issue. So I was wondering if there can be any clarity. Was this truly an aberrant low count because of technical issues? Or was it potentially a low count because there truly were fewer fish?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I James, do you want to try to field that, or should we, Sheree Patterson, why don't you address that?
Thank you for the question. So those 2 years that reflected low counts actually had environmental issues that are consistent amongst any year, right? Whether you have good runs or not. We have other fish ladders that would, or other rivers that would have higher counts normally, or high counts, so that we wouldn't necessarily have had to close down the fishery based on the 2 river systems that I talked about, the Exeter and the Cochico. But because of those environmental conditions, those rivers were also low. So let's go back to the Exeter. We always have those environmental conditions. Every fish passage system does. Sometimes you have high flows that prevent fish passage systems from being efficient. Sometimes you got the cold temperatures that would prevent the early run of alewives to make it up through, but your bluebacks make it up through. It's just the environmental conditions can change year to year. But this was kind of an anomaly where we had 2 big river systems that had, I don't want to say big river systems, but river systems that had good runs. dam removal prevented us from effectively counting one of those systems. And a modification to the Cochico failed to produce what we were hoping it to do. We were hoping that we didn't have to clean out the ladder 3 times a day, do it by hand. We were hoping to have this these modifications that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service actually designed for us. We were hoping that that would just be allowing the fish to do a complete swim through. For 2 years, that didn't happen, so we ended up tearing out those modifications in order to revert the fish ladder back to the way it was originally designed. Then we started seeing a decent returns at that point in time. At the Exeter, what we changed for counting the fish was doing time counts down by the former dam that was removed, as opposed to relying on the next fish passage system for those counts. So we were thinking about coming to this board last year, but the TC indicated that they wanted to see more daily time counts in order to increase the statistical validity of what we were seeing in time counts. So we did that this year. We had, prior to this year, an average of 3 time counts a day. This year, we had an average of 6 time counts a day. Some days we had 9 time counts. And we're still seeing over 100,000 passing through where the former dam was, essentially. So we had the fish there in the Exeter. It's just that we didn't have counts as to when the fish were there at a particular location. Did that help, or do you need other clarity?
I believe it helped. And I believe that it reinforces my notion that in fact the low counts were an aberration affiliated with technical issues as opposed to truly environmental issues. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sheree. And I had Dennis Abbott.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I live on the Lamprey River, the river we're talking about, and where the fishery would be prosecuted is right in the middle of town. I guess methods of fishing could be with some gill nets if possible, but there has been one existing old-fashioned stick net with a box that protrudes out in the back of the community church in the middle of our town. It's not being operated now, but it is owned by one gentleman who is 75 years old, and I don't picture him making much of a dent in the fishery if it's reopened. He tends it with a rowboat when he does fish. Some of the locals say he's not a good fisherman and he doesn't really know how to set the poles, et cetera, but he does catch, and he's been, I won't say probably a thorn in the side of Cherie and myself through the years since it's been opened. He has an attorney friend that likes to call us and wants to see this open. So for Jerry Collins, I wouldn't mind seeing this open at this time. I also have pictures here in my iPad of what pictures were taken 10 years ago of the weir and whatever, but I don't think anybody needs to see that. So it won't harm the fishery if Jerry Collins is able to operate his little fishing weir.
Thank you, Dennis. Really appreciate that context. So is there any other discussion around this motion? Okay, so I'm gonna try it. Is there any opposition to this motion? Fantastic. So this motion is considered approved by consent. And you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and read it into the record. And the motion is moved to approve the updated river herring sustainable fishery management plan and proposal to reopen the fishery from New Hampshire as presented today. So thank you for that. And Maine, you are up next. So Wes, you can take it away.
Thank you. Let me go to the next slide. Thanks. So moving on to Maine's SFMP update. Maine has 36 municipalities that maintain exclusive river herring harvest rights. Currently, 22 of those municipalities are in the existing SFMP. And 2024, 19 commercial river herring fisheries were executed by those 22 municipalities. 14 municipalities do not fish because they're not covered under the SFMP. And Maine has approximately 230 waters that support river herring populations. Next slide, please. River herring harvest is strictly controlled by municipalities that are granted exclusive harvest rights by the state. There's one fishing location and one harvester per watershed. The season starts when the first fish arrive to June 5th with an option to extend until June 15th if approved. Currently, there is a three consecutive day lift period that allow fish upstream to spawn, and there's no fishing in the watershed above a municipality that has exclusive harvest rights. Next slide, please. So new additions to Maine's SFMP include 5 additional commercial fisheries, updated fisheries independent surveys, recalculated 25th percentile metric, updated Z estimates from the most recent river herring benchmark stock assessment, and a new age requirement. Next slide, please. So for fisheries to be added to the fisheries management plan, Maine has defined sustainability as follows. It must demonstrate a repeat spawning ratio of greater than 20%, Z estimates of less than or equal to 1 before commercial fishery begins, an annual release of 235 spawning fish per surface acre, and an age structure that demonstrates the presence of older fish. Next slide, please. For management triggers, if a run demonstrates a declining trend in the 3-year average of annual run counts, the fishery will close for the following year. If the Z estimates exceed 1.67 from the previous year, the number of fishing days will be reduced until those Z estimates fall below 1.67. If the repeat spawning of 20% is not achieved, fishing days again will be reduced until that rate exceeds 20%. Finally, if river herring populations that don't demonstrate the presence of fish ranging from age 3 to 7 for more than 3 consecutive years, that will result in a reduction of fishing days. This plan was recommended for approval by the TC. And I can take any questions. Thanks.
Okay, any questions on the Maine SFMP? Okay, seeing no questions, this one also requires action. Is there a motion from the board? Pat Keller.
I think you have a prepared motion, Madam Chair. I would move to approve the updated river herring sustainable fisheries management plan for Maine as presented today.
Excellent, and I got a second from Eric Reed. Is there any discussion on the motion? John Clark.
I should have asked sooner. I'm just curious, the highlights in the table of contents, is that about confidential data from Maine? And plus Maine misspelled New Hampshire in that table of contents as Hugh Hampshire.
Is that about confidential data? Do you know?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to check the table of contents exactly, but there are 2 versions of the SFMP, one with confidential data and one without, that were ready for the TC to review the confidential data if necessary, and so that might just be a leftover on the table of contents in the non-confidential version.
Any other discussion around this motion? Okay, is there any opposition to the motion? Great, seeing none, it passes by consent, and we have passed the motion to approve the updated river herring sustainable fishery management plan for Maine as presented today. And now we are going to move on to Massachusetts and Connecticut. Take it away, Wes.
Thank you. So the last 2, we have updates from Massachusetts and Connecticut for American shad. Currently, Massachusetts is proposing a continued recreational harvest of American shad in the Merrimack and Connecticut rivers. All of their state waters are catch and release and have been so since 2012. Their sustainability targets for the Merrimack is the fish count lift, the 25th percentile at the Essex Dam fish lift over the time series. They will also use a Z estimate of 0.98 as a warning threshold. In the Connecticut, they will use the 25th percentile of the Holyoke Dam fish lift over the time series, which is 140,000 shad. And they will also use sustainability metrics for the Connecticut as defined in the Connecticut SFMP, which I'll go over next. If management action, for the management action threshold, there's 3 consecutive years below the benchmark will trigger mass wildlife and DMF and Connecticut if it's in the Connecticut River to review, or for a review to consider reducing harvest. This plan was recommended for approval by the TC. Next slide, please. And for Connecticut, Connecticut is proposing to continue the commercial and recreational harvest on the Connecticut River. Their sustainability targets are the passage at Holyoke, which is 140,000 fish. Recruitment is 25th percentile of the time series and an escapement of 90%. Connecticut uses a stoplight approach for their management action threshold. Green is when all 3 indicators are positive, yellow is 2 out of 3, orange 1 out of 3, and red if all indicators are negative. Their management response will vary depending on which indicators are positive. And it's important to note that all metrics for this plan since their last update have consistently been above the threshold or trigger values indicating a green stock status and a low level of management concern. And this plan was also recommended for approval by the TC.
Okay, any questions? Questions? Okay. Anybody have a motion? Before the board. Sherry Patterson or Dan McKiernan?
Thank you. I'll make that motion to approve the updated Shad Sustainable Fisheries Management Plan from Connecticut and Massachusetts as presented today.
Awesome. We have a motion from Dan McKiernan and a second from Sherry Patterson. Any discussion on the motion? Is there any opposition to the motion? Excellent. Approved by consent. And if that is a motion to approve the updated Shad Sustainable Fishery Management Plans from Connecticut and Massachusetts as presented today. And that takes us to the last item on our agenda, which is other business. Is there any other business to come before the board? Excellent. Thank you for the discussion. And do we have a motion to adjourn? Any opposition to adjourning? We're adjourned. Thank you.